Hello everyone, and thank you for watching UCA's Center for Writing and Communication workshop screencast over how to format your paper in Chicago Manual of Style. Today we will be covering basic formatting, things like the title page, footnotes, endnotes, the bibliography, and more. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, to get started, let's talk about print sources that you can utilize. These print sources you can find here at the Center for Writing and Communication. You can also find them at any local library, at your university library, but you could check out the Chicago Manual of Style itself, the print text. You will want to check out the 17th edition. This picture here is the 16th edition, but it has been updated. There's a 17th edition. Keeping that in mind, however, that you're a professor and may be using older styles of Chicago. If that's the case, you just need to talk to your professor, communicate clearly with them about their expectations, and use the edition that they are most familiar with and that they would prefer that you use. You could also check out A Manual for Writers by Kate L. Turabian. Turabian, the last name of Kate L. Turabian, who wrote A Manual for Writers, the word Turabian, her last name, is actually used kind of interchangeably sometimes with Chicago style. Some people will say Turabian style. Really, they're just using her last name, but that's because she wrote this book, A Manual for Writers of Research Papers, Theses, and Dissertations, that is basically just Chicago style for students, like it says, for students and researchers. It's making Chicago style more accessible. It's more user-friendly. She offers suggestions and even kind of offers some modifications that would make the style just easier to use. So if you hear somebody say Turabian style, they're really talking about Chicago style also. I know I heard Turabian style first and didn't realize that Chicago style was basically the same thing until later on. So just keep that in mind. You could also check out a pocket guide to writing in history. This also has some helpful tools for writing in Chicago style. So first, what's the difference between Chicago and Turabian? I basically kind of already talked about this a little bit, but the answer is the audience. The Chicago Manual of Style is typically used for publishing, whereas Turabian, Kate L. Turabian, wrote this book that made Chicago style more user-friendly, and it's used by students more often because of that, because of its accessibility. So there's not really a huge difference. Again, your professor might use it interchangeably, Chicago and Turabian. So be aware moving forward, too, that there are two different ways to cite in Chicago style. The first one is author date, which is similar to APA and this used with the social sciences. And the reason it's similar to APA is because you would actually include a parenthetical in-text citation that has the author's last name and the date, which is basically exactly what you do when you're doing APA. You use a parenthetical citation with the author and the date. The more common use of Chicago, however, is the second one here, and that's the one we're going to be talking about today. It's the footnotes and the bibliography version. This is used in the humanities. History uses it. Religion, world religions, probably art. I know that those use Chicago sometimes as well. So this is the version that we're going to discuss. It's called the footnotes and bibliography version. So footnotes or endnotes. You do need to know that there is a difference between a footnote and an endnote. They are not the same thing and cannot be used interchangeably. A footnote appears at the bottom of your page, and it's basically kind of like a superscript number, like a little number that appears that you insert after a sentence. And it takes you to the bottom of the page where you will include bibliographic information, things that you would include in your bibliography, like the name of an author, the title of a work, things like that. So instead of like in MLA and APA where they include parenthetical in-text citations, you don't have to do that here in Chicago. You just see the little number and you go to the bottom of the page and match the numbers together, and that has the necessary information you need to know about the source being used there. Endnotes, however, don't appear at the bottom of the page. They actually go to the very end of the document. And that's not where you include bibliographic information usually. Usually endnotes are just further commentary or explanation about a topic that you're talking about in your paper. So say that you have something in your paper that you're trying to explain, or you mention a researcher's name or a historian or somebody, and you don't have a lot of time to expand on who that person is or why their contribution is necessary, you kind of have a brief space, you can include that kind of information in an endnote, for instance. Ultimately, just ask your professor. You may not have to use endnotes at all. So just talk to them. Again, clarify expectations and what they're wanting from you. So when and why do we cite? Most of you probably already know this, but a citation is when you paraphrase or summarize or quote from a source, and then you need to give credit where credit is due, basically. Some people think that if you are putting the source, whatever, if you're putting the source in your own words, like in a paraphrase or a summary, then you don't have to cite. This is not correct. You do still have to cite, because the basis is not whether you're using their exact words, it's whether you're using their idea, something that they created, that they formulated, that they postulated, whatever. If you didn't create it and you're not the originator of it, then you need to give credit where credit is due. So it's not about word for word, it's about ideas. Direct quotes should have their own citation. It's important to give the exact location, i.e. the page number, for quotations. So that's pretty typical. I think every documentation style asks you to include a page number if you're giving an exact quote. Sometimes if there's not a page number, you can give a paragraph number. It just kind of depends. In this case, make sure that you give direct quotes their own citation, meaning they would get their own footnote, for instance. And it's extremely important to pay close attention to your citations, because citing sources inappropriately or not citing them at all can lead to accusations of plagiarism. Yeah, plagiarism is just not giving proper credit to someone or to an organization. So remember, if it is not yours, then you need to make sure to cite. A good rule of thumb maybe is when in doubt, cite it out. So some standard rules for formatting. Chicago paper should be double-spaced, 12-point Times New Roman. There are other options besides Times New Roman and 12-point font. I would say to stick maybe with just Times New Roman 12-point font, just kind of as your basis, as kind of a safe choice every time. With Chicago, with APA, with MLA, all of them seem to like 12-point Times New Roman, and that's just kind of a good default to go straight to. Don't add extra space between paragraphs. That is a little bit unique and different, I think, perhaps, than a typical double-spaced paper. But that's pretty easy to do. There's something on Google Docs, for instance, and on Word where you can say add or remove space between paragraphs. So, and then title page, you'll have your title, your name, the name of the class, and the date. I'm going to show you how to format a title page in just a second. And then finally, the body of your paper with footnotes and maybe endnotes if you have to include those. I will also show you on Google Docs how to include footnotes. So this is what a document, a title page would look like. Notice that you have the title right here. It is not completely halfway down the page, close. And then you have the name, the class, and then the date. So I'll show you just really quickly how to do that. Very simple. We want to make sure we're in Times New Roman 12-point font, of course. We want to make sure that we're also double spaced. So we're going to center ourselves in the paper. And then we're going to go down a little bit. I'm going to say, here's probably good. So you're going to say title goes here. It might be a long title. I don't know. You can go a couple of lines in your title. That is definitely acceptable. And then you're going to go a little further down the paper and you're going to write your name. It has to be your first and last name. And then you're going to have your class name. And then you're going to give the date. The date doesn't have to be written in any special way. So notice that this looks very similar to this. So it's very straightforward, very simple. You will not have a page number on your first page. So when you're doing that and you're trying to add a page number, you'll just go to Insert, Page Numbers. Page numbers can actually, in Chicago style, interestingly enough, be put at the bottom of the page. They can be in the top right corner of the page. They can kind of be all over the place. I would say top right corner is just probably the best bet. And just click Different First Page. So that way it doesn't appear here. And then whenever you do, say, let's do a page break, you'll have your number, your page number still up here at the top. And it's not on your first page as well. Sometimes your professor will want your second page to have a 1 instead of a 2, even though technically it is your second page. And you can kind of mess with that. You can mess with things like your header format, and you can have page numbers and how you want to change that. And you can remove the header altogether. So that's just kind of up to your professor ultimately, I would say. All right. So now let's move on to the bibliography. One, it's not all double spaced like MLA and APA. There's only a double space between every single separate citation. So I'll kind of show you what that looks like as well. If a citation is more than one line, those lines are the ones that are single spaced. So you would not double space those like you would in APA or MLA. And then page numbers. Don't place a number on the title page. I already said that. And you can place it anywhere, but top right, I would say, is a pretty standard go-to. Again, when in doubt, ask your professor and see what they want. So you will notice in this page, because we're about to get further into footnotes, it's very, very hard to see, but there are tiny little numbers kind of throughout here, and those are the footnotes. And these footnotes correspond, these little superscripts, they correspond to what's going on down here. And this right here has the information from the source that you need to include. So one, how to insert footnotes in Google Docs. I'll show you how to do that. Word allows you to use footnotes and endnotes. I don't believe Google Docs has an endnote capability yet. So if you're including endnotes in your paper, you'll need to use Word rather than Google Docs. The reason I'm using Google Docs is because it saves automatically. You can access it from any device because it's connected to your Google account. And a lot of students utilize it because of its accessibility. So if you want to use Word, you can. It is a little bit different than Google Docs, but also pretty straightforward, I would say. Always indent the first line of the footnote or endnote. So it is a first line indent, kind of like what you would do if you were starting a new paragraph. It's not a hanging indent like you would use in MLA or APA. So similar to like if you were starting a new paragraph, the first line of that paragraph is indented. That's basically what it would look like when you do a footnote. So if we go back here, you'll notice down here at the bottom that this footnote is indented on the first line, but not on the second line, kind of like a paragraph. So separate multiple sources with a semicolon. So if you're going to include multiple sources for one footnote, for instance, you just use a semicolon to denote that. And then end a citation in a footnote or an endnote with a period. And that's pretty much the same with MLA or APA. You usually will use a period. After you use an in-text citation, for instance, and most sources on works cited pages and references pages also end in a period. So here's what a bibliography looks like. Notice that the double space is only between each new citation. It's not used within a citation itself. So if you're looking here at like Yale Law School, for instance, this is all single spaced, and the double space happens when you get to a new source. Notice it's all in alphabetical order. Bibliography is here centered. It's not bolded or anything, it's just centered here at the top. So the title bibliography should be centered at the top of its own page, like I was just saying, and it should be the same font and font size as the rest of the paper. You don't need to change anything, make it bigger, bolded, anything like that. Citations in the bibliography do look different from the footnotes and notes. So a footnote, this is actually screenshotted from Purdue OWL, and I think it's really helpful. A footnote would look something like this. Like if you were doing a book, for instance, it would have the first and the last name of the author, the title of the book, the place of publication, publisher, year of publication, and then the page number that you got it from. Whereas the corresponding bibliographical entry for that footnote, because every footnote has to have a corresponding citation in the bibliography, would look a little different. So for instance, the name's inverted. It starts with the last name, comma, then first name. Then you have period, rather than the comma, title of book, period. No need for parentheses. You have place of publication. So you see how they're differing? Publisher and year of publication. And of course, you don't need a page number in the bibliography. So I'm going to skip this portion just so I can show you some Purdue OWL. This is just you kind of on your own. Can you use this information below to write a footnote and a bibliography citation for a book? So just John Smith, The Great Book, New York, Hitchens, 2006. And can you use this information, apply it, and basically write something like a footnote here or a bibliographic entry here? But since for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. So we have some helpful resources. We're about to look at Purdue OWL, but you can look at Chicago Manual of Style website, Purdue OWL, which we're going to look at, reference guides, like I mentioned at the very beginning, and of course, you can come see us at the UCA Center for Writing and Communication. So really quickly, I'm going to go to Purdue OWL, and I'm going to just go to Chicago Style, the introduction. You can start at the very beginning. They have an overview and a workshop you can go through. They give you a little synopsis of the formatting and the style guide. You can also, when you're looking at Chicago Style, so this right here is the overview and the workshop, why you use it and when you use it. History, English, and art, for instance, might use it as well. And then when we get to the formatting, this is the part that I think is most important. So right here on the left-hand side, this is the gold mine here for you. So general format is helpful because it shows you how to do the title page. I love that they give you examples. So not only do they explain it up here, telling you that the title should start a third of the way down and centered, and then you write your name and then the class name and the date and all of that. It gives you an example, which is helpful. And then when you begin the main body, it gives you further examples and things you need to know about references moving on. This is an example of a bibliography as well. Notice that the bibliography does use a hanging indent. So whereas in a footnote, you would not do the hanging indent. You would do the indentation of the first line. The bibliography is different, and you would do a hanging indent. I will show you how to do that on the document in just a second. Something that I think is the most helpful, so you can use books, like how you format a book. I love that they, real quickly, that they show you how to do the footnote and then how to do the corresponding bibliographical entry with it. And then they give you examples. This one's by multiple authors, how to do the footnote, how to do the corresponding entry, and so on. And that's extremely helpful and accessible, I think. Finally, you can go down here and you can click on the NB sample paper. This means Note Bibliography Sample Paper. And it shows you not only what a paper should look like, but it also gives you these little boxes to explain why things are the way that they are, I guess. And so it explains the footnotes to you, and it explains the title page and the bibliography. And so keep that in mind, the NB sample paper. Now, just really quickly, I wanted to show you a couple of things. Say that you begin writing here, and then you want to add a footnote. You just go to Insert, and then you click Footnote, and then it takes you down here, and this is where you would begin writing. So begin writing here. Something to remember is that you need to make sure you stay in let me spell writing correctly. Stay in Times New Roman. You want to make sure that you're sticking with consistency. That's something that style guides are really big on. And I tabbed over because I want to make sure that my lines are indented correctly. Something that you can do besides tabbing over, though, if you need to align and indent differently, you can go to Align and Indent, Indentation Options. And this is where you will find you want to indent your first line, which I do here, so yay. But if, for instance, you wanted to indent, do a hanging indent like you will in your bibliography, you just come here and click Hanging Indent. So you would highlight what you need to, come here, click Hanging, Apply, and it would format it correctly for you. So that's very simple, how to add a footnote. Now, say that we want to do our bibliography. I'm just going to really quickly, and this is how I'm going to conclude. You will have your bibliography here. You need to make sure that you do a hanging indent. So you would do last name, first name. You have the title of the work, whatever that is, publication, information, all of that. You have a date and so on. Remember that you can have a double space in between. So if I was going to have another entry here, that's okay. But say that this went on to, I'm going to go ahead and just do this really quickly. Say that this went on to the next line because, oops, it's a long entry. So remember, you need to format it as a hanging indent. So we can do that really quickly. But we also want to make sure that this is single-spaced. Now notice this is wanting to make everything single-spaced. One easy way to do that is literally just enter down and create a double space between it. I think that's the easiest way to do it. But you can also go back up here and change things to double space. Notice here is also where you can add spaces between before or after paragraphs. Sometimes this will say remove the space before or after a paragraph. And so that's where you can find that feature as well. So finally, to just kind of conclude, you can contact us by coming to see us at Wynne Thompson 109. You can call us at 501-450-5123, or you could email us at cwc@uca.edu. Ultimately, I hope that this information was helpful to you. I hope that you feel confident writing in Chicago style. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you again.